What's your favorite memory from a show back then?
I know I have a few memories, but I missed a lot of my shows, unfortunately. As an organizer, a one-man band, he couldn't.
But there got to be one. There got to be one.
Watch a show.
There got to be a moment that you remember, like a favorite moment from one of these shows.
Yeah, it's kind of weird, but when Bismarck he came up here to battle, I believe it was in 1986. I believe I got chills in my body when I saw, this is Bismarck, right? I'm like, to me, he's like, one of the gods in hip hop, and here he is on the stage. But it's like World Cup, he's an American going up against a Canadian because it was Battle of the Human Beatboxes. So when I saw him perform, and I saw New York in Canada basically because he was giving it, R.I.P. Bismarck, he was just giving it as all the way that hip hop was supposed to be. Real street, real authentic. If you saw Biz looked like diabolical, his eyes were twisted.
Yeah.
He's got spit coming out of his mouth when he's rapping.
Yeah.
He looks like a guy that would mug you if you're walking late at night in New York, right? But at this point, he's just fueled by hip hop. He's giving it his all in front of an audience. He loved being an entertainer, and now he's spitting lyrics and rapping and battling. His track pants are like basically falling down to his friggin' knees, but everyone's like cheering, and that's how kind of that pants below the waist look that a lot of guys do now. Yeah. He was doing it back then. New York was a little ahead of her time. So, and there's a connection to that memory too, because it shows you the innocence of the time, because I don't think Bismarck had ever left America before, because he had to drive in from Buffalo. I flew them to Buffalo, and then we usually, to save money, right? We drive them through the border, and he didn't like the immigration officer at the border giving him a hard time and stuff like that. So I just remember him standing his ground and saying, "Yo, I don't care, man. I'll send for my pops. My pops will come and get me." He didn't know where he was. He didn't realize how far away he really was. And at that point in time, I had to plead and beg the immigration officials to let him through and say, "Look, these guys are from New York. They don't really understand what it's like to travel and stuff like that." And so eventually everything was cool. But that was really one of the memories I know that I'll cherish, because it literally put chills down my spine.
You made it a point, as you mentioned, to spotlight local rap acts on your radio show and at your concerts as well. And you're telling me a couple of stories so far about what it was like to watch people come up from New York and battle Canadian rappers. So there's this legendary battle I wanted to ask you about. It's between a young Michie Mee and Sugar Love. from New York, a fellow female battler. What do you remember about that?
Well, I remember it was hard to get a really popular female rapper. A lot of people didn't know who Sugar Love was. But I had to trick people in order to get them to battle. I wasn't completely honest in telling them, "Hey, I'm booking you for a battle." I'm booking you to come to Canada for a show. And then you tell them it's a battle afterwards. But I remember Sugar Love had the sportsmanship to say, "Okay, it's a battle, sure, I'll come." She was just happy to get a gig,
right,
to get out of America at the time to come into Canada. But I remember that Michie Mee, she had a little secret weapon there, and you touched on it before, but it's like the home team advantage, okay? When you look at the demographics of the audience, they're not just black people or rap people, there's West Indian people, and the Americans don't have that West Indian twang to this day. There's no loyalty to it, sorry. Mm-hmm. So when it was Michie Mee's turn to rhyme and battle, she would draw back for that Jamaican patwa, right?
Yeah.
And she does it really good, and that's what took her to victory that night. The fact that she could incorporate that.
Did you know she was going to win when you went?
Nobody knew who would win. Again, we're fascinated by American culture, right? So they were expected to win. It's just like, again, Canada World Cup. We were the underdogs. We're there to learn. We're there to benefit from the experience. And my whole frustration again was that Canada's got the talent, but it's not getting exposed deservingly and properly. So that's why the battle came into effect. Was if we if we have these artists battle, then we're going to make world news, and then they're going to have respect for Canada. And I think some of that was achieved.
So this is something I've been curious about with you for a long time. You eventually turned your focus to reggae and dancehall, kind of where we started, right? We started with talking about you with reggae and dancehall. You did, as you mentioned earlier, kind of pass the reins of your radio show over to a very young DJ X and DJ Mastermind, who became really important, pioneering hip-hop broadcasters in Toronto and in Canada in their own right. But I think there's a big part of your story that I've always been curious about, which is there seems to be this part of the article, which is at some point Ron Nelson turned away from hip hop. Why? What prompted that?
Let's see. I had lost a decade and a half of my life. I bought a house. I lost my house. You know, the reason I bought a house was just to have a recording studio in it. I was not thinking progressively. Other people are buying houses now and having families and thinking about their future and stuff like that. I realized I had been out there on the streets beating it out for years had gone by, a decade had gone by, and I've never had a decent job. You know, up until that point, I'd never been employed. So I'm there hustling on the street legally without selling drugs and stuff like that, but I'm still watching other people around me grow up, and I'm not growing up. So I recognize some of that. I'm like, I need to make a decision here about my future. And at the same time, hip-hop had become commercialized. I felt to some degree I had done my work and I had done my part, and it was time for other people to grow up and do their parts. And there's one other factor too. Hip-hop is very youth-oriented. It belongs to young people. I was getting older, so the X generation, the Mastermind generation, the DJ Power generation, the Thrust generation, all those kids, the Mishi Me, the Maestros, the Rumblin' Strongs, you know, they wanted to have their turn now. And the most unselfish thing I could do is say, here, it's the right thing. So I basically passed on the baton. I was so busy doing so many things at once. As I said, recording studio engineer and promoter and DJ and on top of it, radio broadcaster. And it just went on and on. You had to do so many things at once. It was almost a relief to say, okay, you guys take it on. So then after a while, I noticed that my attraction for music was not just for hip-hop or reggae. It was for underground. It was for something that was raw, something that was still like a hidden gem, a diamond
unfiltered
in the
by
rough
the mainstream kind of thing. Yeah.
So you understand what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Now that's what dancehall became to me, because dancehall came a lot from the same place that hip-hop came when hip-hop first birthed, but then hip-hop changed its whole meaning afterwards. So hip-hop had nothing to do after a short period of time with you know, trying to get messages out of New York that was publicizing what a devastating place it was in terms of poverty and all that stuff. It wasn't message music anymore, right? It became bling music, basically. People are now rapping about how much money they had and this and that, et cetera, et cetera. So
that didn't feel pure to you. That didn't feel...
No, I'm old school. So that was totally... I almost missed the transition. So those guys came in at the right time. They could take care of that from now. But I'm more of a conscious black person, right? So I like where hip-hop came from. That generation, they don't have that sense of consciousness. They don't see color as much. It's not as important to them. The Public Enemies and BDP eras were very short as a result of that. They lasted 2 or 3 years. But so as hip-hop became commercialized, dancehall in Toronto especially was new. It was exciting. The artists were new and exciting. I saw a lot of parallels between hip-hop and reggae. We had dancehall people come from the same place in Toronto that hip-hop people were coming from, right? And sometimes you couldn't even tell them apart. And I found that the struggle was still there. That innocence that I was telling you about, the poverty and stuff, dancehall can relate to everything that early hip-hop people could relate to.